I'll be honest, Stan, I think early on, I thought of the word negotiation and I thought one-sided, like I'm winning every time I come out of a negotiation,
Yeah.
Over time, I learned that doesn't work. It doesn't really work. And so the best negotiations to me were when we sat at the table, everybody was open, vulnerable, like you said, and pretty transparent. And then we could work through the issues really quite well.
I'm Stan Christensen, and this is All Things Negotiation. Today, my guest is Joel Clark. For the last 25 years, Joel has been the CEO of Kodiak Cakes, the original whole grain, protein-packed pancake mix. The company is a family business. Originally, his mother's pancake mix was something that he and his brothers sold. Joel built that into a big business, and like all entrepreneurial journeys, especially when they're family-based, there are lots of ups and downs over those periods that involve negotiation. Negotiation with suppliers, negotiation with retailers, negotiation with employees, with customers, with investors. It's just an action-packed story, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Joel Clark, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here, Stan. Thanks for having me.
I've been really excited for this one. You've got one of those products that people just love. In fact, the word obsession comes to mind. My daughter is obsessed with Kodiak Cakes. So I think people are just going to love this story. Could you start off by just telling us a little bit about how this little business got going initially?
So, it's about as, I guess, homegrown family, lemonade stand type business as you can get. It was back in the early 80s. My mom had this idea to take her recipe. She had this great whole grain pancake recipe that she would make for us growing up. And in the 80s, there weren't as many people that actually cared as much about like eating whole grains and things like that. So sometimes my friends would kind of raise eyebrows a little bit on the types of foods that we would eat.
You were that family.
Yeah, we were. We totally were. She would grind wheat in her own wheat grinder at home. And then we would, she would, beat up the egg whites and fold them into the batter. It was awesome. So we loved these pancakes. And I have many memories of waking up to the smell of these hot pancakes and being excited to go to breakfast. Anyway, my mom always kind of had this idea to make a product out of it and sell it. And so that's exactly what she did when I was 8 years old. My mom took brown paper lunch sacks and put this whole wheat in there and all the other ingredients to make the pancakes. And she hand wrote on the bags, like how to prepare it. And then I put them in my little red wagon and went around the neighborhood and sold these homemade pancake mixes to the neighbors.
At 8 years old.
Yeah.
If that doesn't define child labor, I don't know what does.
Totally. Yeah. It was fun. I sold all of them. And then we didn't really keep going with it at the time. We kind of let it just kind of fizzle out. It was kind of we did it a couple times in that summer and then just kind of let it die. But the idea kind of stuck around. And so in the mid 90s, my older brother, John, decided that he wanted to take the idea and actually make a product. And so he was talking to my mom one day and she was like, John, do something with that pancake recipe, make a real product and go sell it. So he loved that idea. So he started working on making a pancake mix that you could just add water only to. So it was a little easier to make. And I remember he asked me, he spent about a year just getting this thing ready, learning all about grains and all the different ingredients. So he spent a lot of time researching and formulating and trial and error and finally came up with something that he loved. And so he asked me to help him start selling this. And so, let me back up just a little bit. Once he got the product done, then he needed to create a brand, right? Like a name and a brand. And I think that's where he really hit a home run actually, because, he really put a lot of his own personality into it. Just loved the outdoors, loved being in the mountains and fishing and things like that. And so he was, as he was kind of thinking about what did he want the brand to be about, and some of the things that kept coming up for him were he wanted something wholesome. He wanted something rustic. He wanted something that kind of represented the old frontier when food was simpler and it was more wholesome, things like that. So one of our older brother, Tim, one day suggested to John, he's like, hey, why don't you call it bear cakes? And John loved the bear. So that was kind of how the bear kind of got incorporated. And So John loved the idea of using a bear in the brand. And that just ended up evolving into Kodiak Cakes. And it really worked. So anyway, he asked me to help him start selling this. And I was 21 and we started selling it in just little gift shops, downtown Salt Lake, Park City, Utah, Sun Valley, Idaho, Jackson, Wyoming. And that's where we really first started. And it just kind of kept going from there. And people immediately, when they found it, they loved it. And we started getting letters from consumers saying, hey, we love this pancake mix. Where can we get more? That type of thing.
I love it. So this really is a bootstrap business. So you took it from, carrying around the wagon in your neighborhood to gift shops in Salt Lake and other towns. But then eventually you guys moved it into real distribution. And my guess is that's where the real negotiation starts. And that's where the real, incorporation and all of those things. Do you have any negotiation stories from the early days about how you got into the retailers? Because I'm guessing that was, a big part of the growth.
Yeah. So that was I remember that being kind of a intimidating, scary experience. So I took the business over, a couple of years after John was running it. And it was just small and he didn't really have time to keep bootstrapping this little business along. So I took it over. He came to me, he's like, do you want to take this thing over? So I did. I was 23. I was going to the University of Utah and no experience, right? Like no experience in business really. But I remember, we deliberately thought we've got to get into grocery if we're ever going to make money doing this thing. So I remember one time decided to try to meet with Smith's, in Salt Lake City.
It's a big retailer.
Yeah, like 70 stores at the time. And that was like kind of a big deal,
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to get on the phone and call. And so I got on the phone, I called, I find out who the buyer was, a guy named Stan Ross. And I remember that. And I left him a message. I probably left him a few messages. And then one day he called me back. And I remember like taking that call and being like kind of surprised and fumbling in my words a little bit, being kind of intimidated that Smith's called me. And he said he would meet with me. I told him I had this pancake mix and he's like, yeah, I'll meet with you. So I go in and meet with Stan and not only was this whole experience intimidating for me, but he's this really big guy. He's a big, tall guy. I bet you he was 6'5" or more. Not a very warm personality, So I'm going in there and all these things are, I'm just feeling like, okay, I got to do this, I got to get past all this and communicate what I need to communicate. Anyway, I did. I got in there and it turns out he listened to me. And so it was a good experience. And one thing that I kind of learned from that, just like from a negotiation standpoint, was if I could connect a little bit and build a little bit of a relationship, the negotiations went better. And I think that was because what I kind of learned was that we like doing business with people that we like or that we connect with. It helps, and you can't connect. It doesn't always work. I mean, there are people that we just don't always connect that well with, and you can still work around it. But that was one thing that I learned from that is it helped. And I actually did develop a bit of a relationship with Stan. And over time, he became kind of an advocate for us. And so when we got into negotiating, so for example, in that first meeting, Stan said, okay, well, I'm really interested in your product. It's cool. I like the brand. It's unique. It's high end. I think consumers will like it. But you've got to sell 20 cases a week out of the warehouse to make this work, And I remember going, that's a lot.
20? Had you ever sold 10 cases?
No, we were selling like a case at a time to these little gift shops, by UPS. Just UPS case here, case there.
Drop ship it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I remember feeling like, how are we going to do that? And so he's telling me this. And then he says, and you need to pay $5,000 upfront in a slotting fee just to get your product in. And that was a lot of money.
Did you even know, you're 23 years old. Had you ever heard the term slotting fee?
No, I didn't really know what it was. I remember hearing, I remember like maybe someone saying, hey, they may charge you a bit of money to get in. But what I didn't know if is that a yearly fee? Was it a one-time? I really didn't know. And Stan had to educate me, which was okay. I also learned we just need to be open and honest about who we are, where we are, what our experience is. And I actually learned that was also a bit of like, that would help me. It was a bit of an asset, like just to be open and say, hey, I'm new at this, don't know a lot. You might have to educate me a little bit. So I got comfortable just being honest about that. And it actually helped because people would be like, well, okay, yeah, I get it. We all have to start somewhere. So they would help. But anyway, Stan starts telling me this stuff and I'm like, okay. Then I started negotiating. I'm like, well, if we pay that fee, is there any way we could get some of that fee reduced and then we would pay it back in some marketing efforts, for example, right? And so I started to think as creatively as I could. And Stan said, well, yeah, maybe we do. I think at the end of the day, he took half of it in cash, and then the other half was in marketing efforts, like paying for an ad in the store or whatever it was. So that was a good way for us to actually get something out of the money that we were spending. And we learned that the stores were actually pretty open to that type of thing.
Interesting. So many lessons there. I'm going to highlight 3 of them. Number 1, you were vulnerable with him. You didn't come in saying, I know everything. You're willing to learn. And I do find that in negotiation, vulnerability tends to beget either vulnerability from them or openness or hitting the relationship. So that's kind of number 1. Number 2 is creatively problem solving together. So many people think that negotiation is you come in with a proposal and you try to advocate for that, and they try to maybe push back a little bit, and that limits the expansion of the pie. And what you really did there was expand the pie. And the third was just the ability to connect quickly with people and form a relationship. I've known you for quite a while, and I think you're particularly just good at that generally. Is there anything about either your history, your training, your personality that allows you to connect quickly to people? Because we kind of had that experience as well.
Yeah, I would say just a couple things. Even just growing up, I kind of liked the idea of, I always enjoyed talking to people growing up, and even adults when I was growing up, I enjoyed talking to them. I always called everybody in our neighborhood by their first name. So I just kind of just what I did.
You're 3 years old.
Yeah. I actually kind of, I don't know, fortunately, I kind of liked that. But then I would say, I don't know, another thing was just like, I went on a mission for the LDS church. That was helpful, I think. Honestly, like you've got just a second knocking on somebody's door to try to connect. So you kind of learn that. I would say that's another thing. And then I would say another thing that I learned was when I was 18, I started buying and selling old cars, like mostly old trucks and stuff. And like when I was in college, saving money for college, that type of thing. And what I learned, I would knock on people's doors, actually. I would drive neighborhoods looking for an old truck or something. It looked in good shape, and I would knock on the door and say, hey, do you have any interest in selling this truck? Well, what I learned from that experience too was that these people would want to sell, like if it's something that meant a lot to them, maybe it's an old truck they've owned forever, they wanted to sell it to someone they liked. Like they often would kind of make comments like, yeah, I want to sell it to you, that type of thing. And so I actually, trying to win hearts a little bit, I think helps. You still have to get to business and it has to work and all that. But I think those were just some things that helped me.
Yeah. A couple things I want to highlight there. Number 1 is you weren't afraid either in the pancake business or in the I want to buy cars and refurbish them to do cold calling.
Yeah.
And I think for some reason, people are really nervous. An LDS mission, I also served an LDS mission. It was in Costa Rica and Panama. And you're doing a lot of cold calling. You're knocking on doors. And when I would interview for jobs later in my career, I would say to people, look, I sold people religion, and that's not an impulse purchase. If you can convince someone to change religions, you can sell some pancake mix.
Yeah.
And people really resonate with that. I think this guy's a good sales guy. He can really connect with people. So I was also fortunate to go on a mission and learn how to connect with people who are often very different from me. Well, how about when you don't have a lot in common? You both don't like trucks. Because in your business, I can't imagine it was always easy to connect with everybody.
Right.
Do you have any examples of people you were able to overcome resistance or connect with people you didn't have things in common with and negotiate that way?
Yeah, I love that question because that happens. That really does happen all the time. So you really have to kind of learn how to do that. And I think there is an example. So I remember there was a woman who worked in one of the Dan's grocery stores. So Dan's grocery store, Foothill Drive. I used to, before we got any real distribution going, I was delivering pancake mix to the 5 Dans in the Salt Lake Valley at the time. So I'd go in like every week and I'd bring pancake mix and I would put it on the shelf myself, and then leave, and I'd leave an invoice, for the store. They'd pay me. But I remember that this woman there, the grocery manager at Dan's, her name was Shawnee. We ended up having a really great relationship, but at first it was hard because our personalities just didn't mesh, and I didn't know how to connect with her immediately. And so, but I think what I learned from that was over time, I figured out a way to do it, and just to be persistent and just to be reliable. Some people connect over things like that, like functional attributes, like, are you reliable? Do you show up on time? And then they might open up once they trust you a little bit more. So I think there's different ways that people build trust with other people. And even though we really didn't have a lot in common, her personality was a little bit more maybe curt or maybe possibly a little bit abrasive than maybe I was used to. But as I went in and I was reliable and I would give her the time of day and just say hello, she really softened, and we ended up having a really great relationship. And I've got a quick story about that, actually. One time at that time I was working at my job still, and I had gotten the Deseret News to write an article about us, about Kodiak and the product. So I had just cold call, again, an example of cold call, and asked if they'd be interested in writing a story about us, and they did. So the day that the article came out, I had no idea what was going to happen. And this was when I would say the newspapers were even more impactful because we didn't have social media. News wasn't quite as fragmented as it is today. So anyway, this article hits this one day in the Deseret News, and I'm at work and I get this call on my cell phone, and it's Shawnee at Dan's. She goes, "Joel, you had a newspaper article hit in the Deseret News. We are sold out. We sold out like by 10 a.m. You've got to get over here."
You gave her a problem.
Yeah. "You got to get over here and bring me like 10 cases. It's like 5 or 10 cases. I can't remember, it was a lot. So I told my boss at work, I'm like, I got to go. They were really cool about it. Like, okay, yeah, go for it. So I left. I went and grabbed a whole bunch of pancake mix, loaded it in my car. I went over. I grabbed a shopping basket, and I brought in all these cases of Kodiak Cakes and talked to Shawnee, and she was just so excited, right? We're moving cases. And that was so fun. And I think just having that relationship built, she called me directly. She had my number, and so I think that just went a long way, and just learned a lot from that.
That's awesome. So at this time, it sounds like you said you had to talk to your bosses. You were part-time. You had a full-time job on the side, and you're just, hucking pancakes on the side.
Yeah.
At what point did you decide to leave and do it full-time?
I decided to quit my job right after I got into Smith's, actually, when Stan decided to bring me in. This was about a couple years out of undergrad, out of the U. So I decided to quit my job then. And so I did. I quit my job, and then we really just had the Smith stores here, which was maybe about 70 stores. Then we had Associated Foods, which is a local distributor for a lot of the independents like Dan's and Harmon's, Macy's, that type of thing. I had gotten into there as well. And that was about it. And I thought, I think I can live on this, which was just barely enough to get by. So I was supplementing by buying and selling cars. So I did that. I quit my job about 2 years out of college. I did Kodiak for about 1 year full time. And then I decided to go back to graduate school. And then after I got home, and by the way, I hired a University of Utah student that I found, a guy named Dave Olson. He ran the business while I was gone. And we are still great friends today, actually.
That's awesome.
Played golf last week. Anyway, great friend. Anyway, then when I got home from graduate school, I couldn't afford to live on it. So I went back to work for another almost 2 years while my brother-in-law, James, ran the business from my in-law's basement. It was just crazy how we pieced this thing together for so long. So he ran it for another almost 2 years. And then I finally was able to quit my job in 2004 and, really dive in full time.
Wow, that's awesome. So at that point, you've got a bunch of retailers. I'm guessing with this kind of a business, you've got suppliers that are important.
Yeah.
And, someone like Dan's calls and says, I need, 15 cases. How do you have that supply ready? Do you have any negotiations, or just talk about those relationships and how you formed them and what you had to negotiate with them?
And forming relationships with suppliers early on is not really the easiest thing. It's really not, because they know that your volumes are going to be really small. You're not going to really make them money, right? For probably a while. So those are actually pretty hard. Those negotiations. So we worked with a couple of really small suppliers, like really small ones, in Salt Lake for a little while. And then somebody introduced us to another one who was a bigger supplier this time. So we went to them and we started talking to them, the larger supplier. And they were, the cool thing about them is they realized that we were really small potatoes for what they did and what they needed. But they also were just willing to kind of meet us where we were and hope that we would grow. And I think that was such a great mentality to have. And so the negotiations with these guys started out on the right foot, because I think they looked at us and said, hey, we know you're small, but we're not going to treat you like, you're nothing. And so we immediately built trust. And I remember, so then they started manufacturing for us. And I remember one time, I think someone called me, or I got a box of our product in the store and I tried it and it was grainy. And I remember just my heart sank, and I'm like, you're already feeling so vulnerable, right? When your business is small, you're like, any little thing could put us under. You feel like that all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was really nervous about this. I'm like, oh no, this is bad. So anyway, I called the supplier and I'm like, hey guys, there's a problem with the product. And they're like, oh, well, what we did is we know the type of wheat that you guys wanted to use. We decided to match it ourselves and blend it on, or mill it on our own mill and put it in the product. And they're like, I guess it didn't come out quite the same.
Would have been helpful to know they're freelancing.
Yeah. And so, but what was great about these guys is they said, all right, well, look, and to me, I'm like, that's gonna cost us a lot of money. And they said, hey, we'll eat the cost of that. This is our bad. We're going to eat the cost, and we'll use the exact wheat that you want, and let's move forward. And that really just built a lot of trust for me, because I was like, man, these guys are awesome. Yeah, it was a little bit of a mistake, but it really wasn't. It wasn't something we couldn't overcome. Like, it was fine. We worked through it, and that really set the tone of a really long-term relationship where the negotiations that we had with these guys became all about win-win outcomes. And it was way less about win-lose, or, hey, we're one-sided or lopsided negotiations. That is not how it worked. And so, that led to, if there was something that they messed up, I would usually give a little bit, right? Like if they shipped the wrong thing and it cost them a bunch of money in shipping, or, we would kind of look at, it was almost like, it wasn't like we were keeping score, but it was like almost subconsciously a little bit like, hey, God, we kind of owe these guys one for the last favor they did for us, or, vice versa. And so from that experience, I learned that, hey, business is about long-term relationships. And the negotiations really need to be about win-win as much as possible. Because I'll be honest, Stan, I think early on, I thought of the word negotiation, and I thought, or even the term, hey, he's a good negotiator. That like had a connotation to me of one-sided. Like, I'm winning every time I come out of a negotiation,
Yeah.
That's how I thought of it. And over time, I learned that that doesn't work. It doesn't really work. And so the best negotiations to me, in my experience, were when we sat at the table, everybody was open, vulnerable, like you said, and open and honest and just pretty transparent. And then we could work through the issues really quite well.
That's so good. I mean, negotiation certainly is. Two things I'd like to highlight. One is what I call the test of reciprocity. And it's almost golden rule-like. Like, look, they did you a favor. You're going to look for opportunities to do them a favor. So that's number one. And then just benefits of dealing in an atmosphere of trust. When you have trust, you tend to look for, how do I help them over time, because they're going to help me. And so it's other-centered and it's self-centered. And so reciprocity really works. Any other stories that come to mind of dealing in the atmosphere of trust that you were able to create, either with them, other suppliers, customers?
Yes, actually. A customer experience comes to mind. So we were working with a big retailer. And I mean, in our world, in the food world, when you're distributing to big retail grocery chains, I mean, they really, they have a lot of power, right? I mean,
and their margins aren't
power.
great, right? I mean, the retail margins are what, 2% or something?
Yeah, they're not great, especially on the bottom line margins are really not great, right? And so they have a lot of power. They're big businesses, and here we are, small suppliers going to them and wanting to try to work with them. And we don't have scale, right? Often when you're new and so you don't have as much marketing dollars. You just your profit margins are not as good. But I remember, one time we were working with this retailer, and man, they were so great to work with. They really wanted to partner with us. And when I say partner, I'm almost just saying, like, kind of back to your point, the negotiations are easier. They're willing to give a little bit more, is kind of what we would feel in a great partnership. But it would make us, like I said, reciprocity, it would make us want to do the same. Well, we were working with this big retailer, and they were just amazing to work with. They realized where we were coming from, where we were, the context of being small, not having a lot of money, but gave us some promotions that we didn't have to pay for, things like that, gave us extra distribution and really helped us become successful. What I saw later, though, was a change, like a real change. And their mentality actually, it was palpable how much they changed. And so it became more one-sided. The negotiations became much more one-sided in their favor. And it became really difficult for us because they started pushing on us, pushing for this and for that.
And this, just to be clear, was a different supplier, or what kind of partner was this?
Sorry, this was a retailer.
This was a retailer. Okay.
Yeah, this was a retail chain that we were working with.
Yep.
And so early on, great partnership, and then it changed. And it felt like almost a strategic shift because it was that deliberate to us. And what happened was we weren't quite as successful. And and we weren't taking as much of our new innovation there, for example, because they just weren't being as great to work with as they once had been. And so it became kind of difficult. And then I think over time that hurt them because we heard the same thing. They were doing kind of the same thing to some of the other businesses. And then I think they realized it. They shifted. They turned it around and started actually partnering again. And then things started happening again. But it's interesting because I think once they kind of realized what was going on and started to go back to the win-win mentality, things started happening again, and the relationship was awesome.
I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm guessing that took some time, because one of the things I say as I'm teaching negotiation is trust. It takes a lifetime sometimes to build a reputation of being trustworthy, but once it's broken, it just really is incremental on regaining it. Was that your experience there?
Yeah. Yes, it took a little while. I mean, you can say it, and you can rebuild trust, but yes, it can take a while to rebuild it.
Well, back to your story. So I think if my calculation is right, you're about 15 years in. Some of that's been part-time, some of it's been full-time. You still just got one product. I remember you have to make the decision, do you bring in a partner or another senior operator? I remember you telling me once a story about bringing in another student from the University of Utah. And talk about that and that decision and, moving to more than just pancake mix and just the next stage of your development. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go back to like 2004 when I first quit my job to like dive in full time. So it's 2004. I'm quitting my job, going to go back in. And this was because we had another big distribution win, and this was Safeway decided to bring it into 1,200 stores. And so I was like, oh, this is amazing. Still only have one SKU. And by the way, to make money in grocery, you have to have a lot of distribution or a lot of SKUs. So even then it was really tight, but I felt like I could, dive into this. So my dad decided to join me out of retirement. He's 65. We had such a great time working together. It was a ton of fun. So my dad joins me. We worked together for almost 4 years and actually made a lot of progress, both in terms of distribution, getting more grocery stores to carry our product. But then also we started down the path of launching new items. We knew we needed to. We were really slow in doing that because we were one SKU for so many years. We finally started to launch a few things. We launched a cookie mix and a brownie mix and a second pancake mix. And we had a great time together. Finally, in about 2009, my dad said, hey, I'm going to retire now. I'm pushing 70 and I think I'm going to call it, Joel. So I'm like, okay, yeah, makes sense, Dad. So went back up to the University of Utah, Career Services, placed an ad, looking for someone to come in and help me. And I didn't have, a lot of money to hire some super experienced person. I needed somebody young who could just dive in and help me and, partner with me and really shoulder, building this business with me. And so that's when I found Cameron Smith. He was just graduating from the U and was just exactly what I needed. I mean, seriously. And he is amazing, super proactive, very driven, and at a young age, a great strategic thinker. He was always coming to me and saying, hey, we should do this, or what about this? Are we thinking about this? And sometimes that was such a blessing to me, because sometimes my head would just be in the weeds, just like thinking about and having a hard time pulling out of the weeds at times to think ahead. Because, when you're a small business, you're kind of doing everything. I mean, I was still doing bookkeeping, it's really tough. But yeah, that was a great progression. Cameron joined, and we ended up working together for 13 years at Kodiak.
Wow. You guys must have had some differences. Even though he's a young guy, I'm guessing he had opinions that were different from yours. How'd you guys work things out? Or can you think of an example of something that you didn't see eye to eye on and how you negotiated it?
Yeah. And I would say we did a lot, actually. And I think that's probably one of the greatest things about our relationship, actually, was that we didn't always see eye to eye. We were often had different perspectives, but we encouraged each other to share them, right? So rather than feeling like I just want to do what I want to do, I don't really want to listen to what Cameron has to say. I mean, that would be a mistake, right? Because you need people that can challenge your thinking, right? And then you get to better outcomes. And so I think the key is to be open to that and deliberately open to that. And so we got better, even better and better with time at being open with each other and challenging each other and sharing where we were coming from. And that just became so healthy for our relationship. But I remember one time Cameron had been in he'd probably been in the business maybe a year and a half. And he came to me and he's like, Joel, I think we should go to Costco. We should try to sell in Costco. And my immediate response was, no, I don't think we're ready. Right. And sometimes
not ready because of the volume they would demand or the margins that they'd try to squeeze you. What were your concerns?
I think it was more because of the volume that they would demand, and could we handle it? I think I was scared of that, and I was scared of working with this giant big partner. Like, could we do it? Like, or are we too small to work with someone that big? That was kind of where I was coming from a little bit. So that was my immediate, kind of reaction. Got to be careful with those immediate reactions too, because you can shut down good negotiation if you're too strong, right? You really can. And so
let me just pause on that real quick, and then I want to hear the rest of the story, which is you should never decide something in negotiation emotionally. Mm-hmm. You should always pause, always take time. Each of us could write a book about all the bad decisions we'd made, under duress of emotion. And so I always tell people, pause when you're feeling emotional. Don't push forward.
No, I love that. You need time. You need to let it sit in and think it through. So my immediate reaction was, no, I don't think we should. I don't think we're ready, right? And fortunately, Cameron, says, no, I actually think we are. So we kind of start this process, this negotiating process, this discussion around why we are or are not ready to go. And I agreed with him. He was right. And so we decided to give it a shot. So we ended up making contact with a buyer, and we ended up getting a little trial in one of the stores, and it worked well. And what was cool is that Costco was able to go kind of step by step with us. And it wasn't that they immediately took the product and put it in 100 warehouses. It was step by step. And that was actually really cool that they were willing to work with a brand as small as we were at the time. This is around 2011, I think. And it really worked out great. We were able to sell a lot. It was also incredible just from a marketing perspective, because Costco really does a great job of getting the word out on products, right? People hear about it and they tell each other. So that was really an amazing thing. And I wouldn't have done it except for Cameron. We should. And we worked through that, negotiated through, and he was right.
That's great. Costco, my kids love to go to Costco because they get the free samples. Did you guys ever have a little booth there where you're giving out free pancake samples?
Oh my gosh, we did so much of that. Like
Did you ever do it yourself? Were you ever the guy?
I like Stan, I can rock a hairnet, man. Like I look great in a hairnet. Like we did a lot of those. Like, so they gave us they call it a roadshow. So it's like a demo, but it's a little bigger, right? You get a little more space and you get to bring banners and make it look pretty cool.
Yeah.
Cameron and I, and even my dad came and helped, and all of the other employees that we had at the time, we didn't have very many, but the whole team, we were all in there doing these road shows, and those were long days. So we'd go into a building and we'd do it like 3 days in a row all day, and sometimes 4 days in a row, and do these road shows just in there. You're cooking pancakes, and it was really, really hard, grueling work, but we needed to, and it was so worth it, and really kind of helped get us going at Costco. I mean, we'd get on a plane. My wife would come and help. We went to Alaska. Cameron and his wife, and me and my wife, we both went to Alaska, and we did these all-day road shows in the 2 Anchorage stores. I mean, we put a lot of effort into it, but I mean, it was well worth it.
I love it. So you probably got some feedback at those road shows. I'm guessing with a product like yours that people feel so passionately about, if you try to change something or you do a new SKU that doesn't live up to the last SKU, you're going to hear from them. Any fun stories about negotiations with consumers and feedback that you got and how you manage that kind of feedback?
Yeah. We all have such different perspectives, right? And that's actually one of the fun things about going even to a Costco and doing a roadshow is you're getting immediate direct feedback from the consumer. I mean, you can't get more immediate than that. And so I always enjoyed that because we'd learn a lot. We would learn a lot from people saying, "Hey, I like this," or I don't like this. There was one early on. I remember I was doing a demo in a Smith store by myself, and because I remember I said Stan Ross wanted 20 cases a week, move through that warehouse, and I thought, well, okay, I can at least go into the stores and set up a table and demo pancakes and sell it myself to make his 20 cases. Anyway, I remember I had a guy come over. He's kind of older guy, and he comes up, he tries it. He's like, well, he goes, I hate whole wheat. It's like, I'm just never gonna eat whole wheat. I don't like it. I'd rather eat white flour, And I just thought we would get that sometimes, especially in the 90s when whole grains were not as big, they weren't talked about as much. And nowadays, there's, people are talking so much about whole grains. We know about the benefits. And so people aren't really pushing us for that. But there was a time, Stan, where I had this thought. I'm like, God, it was taking us forever to get the business off the ground. And I remember kind of going, should we do a white flour pancake just because that's what people want? Should we do that? And I remember I went to my brother John, and he and I were talking about this. We're kind of talking, just negotiating this a little bit, talking about it, debating it. And I remember John saying, yeah, but Joel, if we do that, what do we stand for? We're not standing for anything then, because right now there's something that we're about. We're about whole grains, eating healthier. And I remember the temptation in my mind was just a little bit like, but would we sell more if we just made a clean white flour pancake mix? And I'm so glad that John just was like firm on that. And I went away and I just thought, I thought about it for a while and I realized that John's right. So we didn't do that. And that is one of the best things that we never did. Because I mean, if we would have done that, we would have nothing. We would not stand for something. And your brands have to have ownable space. What is distinct about your brand? And if you don't really have that, it's really tough to stand out and to win a real following that loves your brand.
The thing I love about that story is it's 2 parts in my mind. One is the negotiation with yourself internally. Do you have the integrity? Do you stand for something? Is there a personal brand? Because most businesses, I bet 90% of businesses at some point could sell more product by compromising their values.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at the tech companies. Look at what the social media companies. I remember the early days of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg saying, we're just about connecting the world. It's not about advertising. And look what happened there. And so most people eventually sell out for growth.
Yeah.
And so, congratulations on not doing that. It brings up another question, which is family business.
Yeah.
If I understand your story correctly, your mom was kind of the founder in the sense that's her recipe, but John, your older brother, really ran it and then handed off to you. Talk about that handoff. Talk about his ongoing role, if any, in the business, tensions that may or may not have come up. One thing that I commonly say to students is don't work with your family. Just there are no exceptions to this. You're going to have too much conflict. Your relationship with your family members is too important because business is tough.
Yeah.
Sharp elbows are really hard in families. So it seems like you guys survived that. So just talk about those family business dynamics and negotiations, either with your brother or your father was in the business. How'd that go for you guys?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think family businesses can be really, really tough. And I think we honestly, I think we made it work probably as well as you can. Like we really, really did. And I think it's because we all went into this without, I would say we went into this with more of a, not what's in it for me mentality, but what's in it for everybody else mentality. I think we did a good job of that. And I think that's not that easy. It's not always that easy to do because, you have to, everyone's got to look out for themselves to a point, right? I mean, you have to. But I would say that was one of the best things that we did was some of our negotiations, Stan, were honestly like reverse negotiating. Like a lot of our best negotiations were, I remember having discussions around, you have to have a discussion around equity, right? My brother sold me the business in 1997, but a couple of years later, when we incorporated the business, I gave him shares back, right? And then when my dad joined and worked for nothing for 4 years, basically nothing, we gave him shares. And my brother mostly did that out of his shares since he hadn't been in the business working as much, and I had been in there the whole time. But so we had a lot of negotiating around that. I think what we did.
Can I just interrupt right there? And
sure.
You and I have had this conversation. I'm so impressed with how you did it. So your brother basically owned the business, sold it to you, presumably for a small price. You didn't have a lot of money in 1997.
No, $1, by the way.
Okay, so $1 you came up with to buy this business. So you own 100% of the business for $1, and then you said you gave him some shares. Talk about how much you gave him and at what point in the business.
Yeah. So, by the way, he really was going to shut the business down. I mean, it was just at that point, right? And
so $1 might have been the right price.
Yeah, he's just giving it to me. Basically, hey, Joel, see what you can do with this, right? And I'm going to college. I don't need a lot of money. So I'm like, I can do it. I can keep it alive and see what happens. Well, a couple of years later, I'm like, I really got into this and I wanted it to work so bad. And I was really hopeful. I didn't know if it would, but I hoped that it would, obviously. So, we finally set up an S Corp, and I went back to John and I just said, hey, I'm not keeping this whole business, So I gave him half the shares, and we were always trying to negotiate a little bit more for the other person than ourselves. And I think just that mentality, we built trust with each other. We knew that that's how everyone felt. Everybody cared actually a little more about the other person than themselves. And so that, I think, was probably a big key, a big foundation point about why we were able to work together well. We would always get to a good place. And I was always grateful for that. But yeah, we would have to talk. We'd have to negotiate and be open about how we felt and why. And I think that's such a big key. Communication is huge. If you're not communicating, then you'll sit there and you'll stew on things, and the wedges kick in, and then you might get upset. But you can usually communicate your way out of most issues pretty fast.
Yeah, I really believe that. This really goes back to what you said earlier about reciprocity. I want to highlight your generosity in giving half the company to your brother, who wasn't, he was the founder, but you were doing all the work. And that was a generous impulse. And then, later as, he's advising you or maybe disagreeing with you about a specific issue, 8 years is a lot. I think of how I think of my younger siblings, and it'd be hard for me to, watch them run my company and not have some strong opinions. But it sounds like you guys really approached it from a spirit of reciprocity and generosity. And it doesn't mean you agreed, but you're able to get through that, which I think is rare in families, by the way. I think it's rare for an older sibling to be generous with a younger sibling. I think the reciprocal, which is certainly economically, you were generous with him, So I just think that's just such a great lesson in generosity within a family. Well, on this journey, which is a long one, so many people I interview for this podcast have technology companies that they run for 5 or 10 years and then they're liquid. But 20 years into this business, you decided to raise some money. And so you went out to the venture market and explored that. Talk a little bit about who you raised money from and why you decided on them versus other folks. You had a lot of options.
We did. Yeah, we had a lot of options. And I think the way that I went about it was I knew we needed capital because we were finally starting to grow. I mean, like some great things started to happen. We're getting momentum out in the market. And so this was finally, after all these years, we're like, oh my gosh, okay, we're growing. This is great, but we needed help. So not only did we need some capital just to fuel the growth, but I feel like we really needed just some know-how, right? Some advisors, some strategy, and some people that could help us who knew how to do it. When we started, Cameron and I started the process of raising capital, we said from the beginning, we're like, look, we really need a great partner. We don't just need the function of money. Like we need someone who we really would like to work with. I remember I called my buddy, Jeremy Anders, he runs Traeger. And Jeremy, I was talking to him, trying to get some advice on like raising capital, and he'd been through it a lot. He's like, Joel, you need to want to take the call when your investors call you. And that really resonated with me, because sometimes you get a call from somebody like, you kind of like bristle just a little bit, like, I guess I'll take the call. Then sometimes you get a call from somebody like, oh, I'm excited about this phone call, right? And you want to take the call. And so when Jeremy said that just really stuck. And so we went into this process and we said, all right, we're going to take about a year and we're going to meet a lot of people. We're going to interview a lot of people before we take a deal because we want to find someone who we feel is a great fit for us. So I called a guy, an investor that I knew. I'd met him a few times at some trade shows. And so I called him up and I was telling him, hey, we're ready to raise money. And he's like, hey, let's meet. So I went out to meet with him and he loved the deal, right? He really liked our deal. And I didn't think we could get the valuation that we wanted for maybe another year as well. So I'm like, we'll probably, maybe in a year, we'll be really ready to go. And by then we'll have met a lot of people and know who we want to work with. Well, he wanted to do the deal. And so a couple days later after our meeting, he calls me, he's like, hey, Joel, I'm ready to go. I can get to your valuation that you want. And there are tricks in private equity where they can get to your valuation if they add a lot of stuff to it, a lot
structure, they call it.
Yes. And so anyway, he said, I can get to your deal. And he kind of said, let's walk through this. So he walks through this term sheet. He's like, I've got a term sheet ready to go. I was not expecting that. And I had told him, I said, I'm not ready. I want to wait a little while. I just want to meet some people. So he calls me and he's like, hey, walks through it with me. And he says, you have till tomorrow night to respond to this. And I'm like, this is not a used car that we're selling,
Yeah, so he's giving you an exploding offer, essentially.
Yes.
This offer goes away if you can't say yes by Friday evening.
Totally. And this was a weird negotiation because this was all about him. He was not thinking about me at all. There was nothing of, hey, I think we'd be a really great partner for you. If you're not ready yet, that's fine. I'll give you all the time you need, but we just know we love the deal. He could have just said things like that even and just shown a little bit more, empathy towards me, some reciprocity, but there was none of that. And so these red flags go up. I start bristling. I'm like, this is strange. And then I even called up one of the CEOs that he had backed, and I could tell this guy was like, he was not happy. He had to be careful what he said, but he was not having a great time.
Yeah.
And so I walked, and we never had more conversations. But what we did after we met a few people, we started to kind of hone in on the type of people that would be a good partner. And once we met the investors that we ended up working with, it was obvious. It was so obvious. I could tell from the beginning, they cared so much about me as a founder, how I was doing, and wanted to align with me and back me. And their negotiation was completely different. It was, how do we get aligned and how do we build this business together in the right way? Oh, and by the way, there are some terms of a deal that we would need to put together. We can probably get to that. So the deal terms, yes, they need to be good and you need to feel good about them. But I was less concerned about that. And so we put together the deal terms so fast. That was so easy because everything else was aligned. And so these guys ended up just being phenomenal partners for us.
Yeah, two things there. The first party that you didn't go with, that exploding offer is kind of a tactic, right? They're just trying to get you to commit. They're worried that someone else is going to come on. And this happens all the time with students, where companies will try to hire them and they'll give them an exploding offer, say this expires on Friday. And what I tell students, and you've reiterated this in terms of, raising venture capital, anyone who gives you an exploding offer is the wrong partner by definition. You don't want to go work for that company. You don't want to take that investment because it's essentially just a tactic that's one-sided. Totally. And the guys that you went with, Sunrise Partners, the terms weren't the thing. And so I would summarize that comment by saying it was all about the process. Mm-hmm. It was how they treated you. It's the relationship you formed versus the terms are the first thing, the relationship's the second thing.
Yeah, great point.
Well, Joel, this has been a great conversation. Congratulations on all your success.
Thank you.
This is going to be my daughter's favorite episode.
That's good.
If you saw a photo of our pantry, we've got the bars they put in their lunch. We've got the pancake mix.
Nice.
Probably need to have you over to make them for us one day to show how to perfectly make pancakes. But I do my best. But thank you so much for being on. And this has just been a great conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Stan.
Thanks for listening to All Things Negotiation. Please subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. If you enjoyed the show, tell a friend and be sure to engage with us on social media. Your likes, comments, and reposts make a big difference and help others find the show. The show was produced by Ezra Trupiano, original music by Peter Breinhold, and designed by Aubrey Benson. Thanks for listening.